Welcome to Getting Ghosted. This is an Intuitive Soul Collective podcast, and I'm your host, Allie Horner. Welcome back. This is Allie here, and we have another fun episode to do today, which was actually suggested by one of my guides and is a topic that I have channeled with several of my friends before and haven't really talked about publicly in years and years and years, since way back before TikTok existed and I had to do all of my channelings on Bookface, which we shall not speak of anymore considering everything going on. So today's topic will be the spiritual or spirit guide's perspective on ADHD and autism. I hope you guys enjoy. Also, quick note that I do have my course coming up. It's called The Art of Channeling, and it's going to help you with learning how to clear conduit channel. Clear conduit channeling can be used in so many ways, from sitting down and writing books, stream of consciousness, to channeling loved ones and guides on the other side, to downloading your larger soul plan or getting more in touch with your calling, to tapping into collective energy and helping to heal and use energy to shift things and to work with things like telepathy, telekinesis, and even more. This course is going to help you with that. I've seen so many cool things happen when people start to really open their energy up to clear conduit channeling, from spontaneous healing to reversing gray hair growth. No joke, which I thought was so bizarre. I did not know that was possible until I saw that in one of my clients. I've even seen some people who ended up healing their acne, like their hormones went back into balance. And I've also seen some people have really spontaneous, cool experiences, and I will talk about them more in another episode. For today, I hope that this is fun and helpful to talk about this topic. So I have my guides here, and we're going to talk about the spiritual perspective, or spirit guide's perspective, on ADHD and autism. And just a reminder for anyone who's not super familiar with my work, I'm Allie, and I'm a psychic medium and a channeler. I've also been doing energy work and working with the other side for about 10 years consciously. And when I was young, I also had these abilities, but tried very hard to shut them down, which didn't go very well. And so I started very consciously and professionally working with my abilities about 10 years ago. So here we are now, and I've been teaching and doing readings for quite a long time while working with my guides on the other side in pretty much my everyday life. So one of the topics that I've had a lot of questions about from others and myself over the years is are ADHD and autism, and what are the guides' perspectives on those? Like, how did they see it? What do they think about it? Is there a spiritual reason for it? People have asked me everything under the sun about these topics. So I wanted to bring in my guides to channel and hear a little bit more. Please just know right off the bat that I am not any sort of licensed medical or mental health professional. So this is not professional medical or mental health advice. You definitely should be using your own discernment and listening to licensed medical and mental health professionals when you think about treatment for ADHD and autism. Also, just know that this is only to give the spiritual guides perspectives. This is not necessarily the only way to see this or the only way to think about it. So it is definitely not meant to make anyone feel that as though their experiences are invalid or stupid or silly or what they know. So just know this is not going to be talking about everything about ADHD and autism, simply only the spiritual guides' perspectives and their particular perspectives on this topic. Okay, so come into this with an open mind, and let's get started. Alrighty, I've got Sam over here. He's coming in, and I've got Eric standing in the background, and then I've also seen Serena and Grace, who are hanging back a little bit, and I see Joy, who's standing over here. She is one of my Joy guides. It's kind of like Joy in Inside Out, except she doesn't look like a cartoon. She looks like just a little girl with blonde curly hair. And she said she's skipping around in her little saddle shoes, and she's saying, "I'm here to talk about." She said they're not saddle shoes; they're Mary Jane's, and she put them up on the table to show me, and they have a little buckle that goes over. And she said, "See," and I'm like, "Okay, I got it. Sorry." And she was just kind of giggling. But they're saying ADHD and autism is a fascinating subject from a spirit's point of view. And it looks like Joy is kind of stepping in more, and Sam is kind of playfully stepping to the side like, "Oh, we'll find then." And I'm guessing that he's going to chime in on and off. So if you guys can tell that the way that I'm talking starts to shift or change, I'm going to it's probably going to be because there's more than one of them talking. Just know they don't take over my body. I'm just trying to, it's kind of like a radio receiver. Like I'm looking back and forth at them and like trying to channel and volley back and forth between whoever is in here. So, Joy is coming up and she just is saying, she goes, well, ADHD is fascinating. And she said, they're super cool humans. And she said, ADHD kids are kind of like, she said, they're kind of like spiritual, she said they're spiritual beings, but like their energy's not totally all the way in their body all the time. And she's saying like their energy's way out. And she's showing me someone's energy field. And she's showing a kiddo standing on the ground, and she's showing me their energy field goes way, way, way up and out to all sides. And she said it kind of like loops around, like they have a lot more speed in their energy, you know? And I was like, oh yeah, I can see it's kind of swirling and moving a little bit faster, and it has these little like sparks. And she said, but look, and she's showing me how the energy, it doesn't connect all the way in, like it doesn't cover their feet all the way all the time, and it doesn't connect in through the ground. Whereas someone normally, their aura would go maybe like 3 feet out, or above and below, and go into the earth as well. So it allows them almost to like ground. And she said, and also they have all of this like majestic energy. And she said, these spiritual abilities come from this type of being, from these types of like guys, like, and she's just showing me how their energy seems to be more, she said it's an evolution. And she said it's not spontaneous. It's meant to be this way. And she's showing how much more of the population has ADHD and autism than we believed when we were young. And she said this is why the research was coming out and changing. She said this is really, really important that it's coming out in this day and age. And she said it's not just more people coming up with it, though. It's more people being seen as different. And she said, or seen as outliers. And she's kind of crossing her arms and making like an angry face, like pouting. And she said, it's not bad to be autistic or to have ADHD. And she said, actually, these are spiritual beings who are sent here to bring more consciousness to earth because their energy loops and swirls and works so differently. And she's showing me someone with autism. They have a really big energy, like a really, really big energy too. But she said theirs is a little more stringy. And she said, not like stringy, like it's almost like it's got like all these different like arms that reach out. And they touch all of these different things all at the same time. And she said, so both of them, because they have such big energy fields, they have really high, she said, really keen senses and high pattern recognition, but also because their energy is so big and so wide. And they said it has so much going on and it's so much faster moving. There's so much more swirling around them all the time. She said for autistic people, their energy is way up by their head, like all the time. And their body can feel really discombobulated and almost like zinging. She's saying like zapping, and it's like overwhelmed and overstimulated. And she said because their emotions are bubbling up and their sensory abilities are bubbling, like they're getting these senses in their body, these feelings in their body, even if they're not certain emotions, and they don't know what to do about it. So she's showing like stimming and squirming. And she said because energy, wherever it's going, it needs a place to come out. And she said, so they're using these different things. And she's showing someone, like she said, even look at people who don't have ADHD and autism. Like sometimes they like to crack their knuckles, you know? And she was like, or they like to like pace a little bit. And I was like, yes, I do now. And she said, kind of like that, like they get a little bit of extra energy in there, and it's building up in their body. And she's like, and they don't know where it needs to go. And they don't know what to do with it because it's kind of like their head doesn't feel like it's always fully attached to their body. Like it's like too overwhelming to put everything that's going on in their brain through their body. And I was just like, okay, okay, that's really interesting. And she said, so, but for autistic people and ADHD people, they're so much more extrasensory. They pick up so much more from the world around them. And she said, and also they can see way beyond space and time when they really let themselves use their senses the right way. So autistic people, as you all are finding out, a lot of them, especially ones who are nonverbal, they can speak telepathically in the mind. And she said, and they know things, like they are reading the landscape. They are not unintelligent. they know a lot, and they even have friends in other parts of the world. And she's showing me the telepathy tapes podcast, and she said this is a huge deal because there were a lot of psychics and mediums who would be able, way back in the day, who got called like cursed or witches because they would be able to tell people, I can hear what your child is saying. I can hear what your auntie over here means, but even though she's not talking out loud, like we know each other. And she's showing a girl being like nonverbal, but turning around and looking at someone in a store and waving. And she said, and the person's like, how did she know that I was saying hello to her in my head or thinking about her or observing her? And she said, it's kind of like that. And she said, it's not a bad thing at all. It's actually an evolution in consciousness. And she said, it's more of a return to the natural state. And she said, because you are really just energy. You're not really just the body. Even the body is just energy. And she said, that's why you can change your body. And she said, you guys think you have to go through routines and all these things to like make your body shape change or to change what's going on with your health, but your body is really just energy. So your intent and action can change it, and often intent alone can start to create different outputs in the body. And she said, now it's not the only thing needed, but there is certain action needed. But she said, it's just to show you the body is malleable, right? So as she said, now the bigger part of you is so much bigger than you think. And she's showing energy going out upward and everywhere. She said, for autistic and ADHD people, they're just more extra sensory. So they have a lot more input to work with. And she said, no, something that would be really good for them is to learn what they came here for. And she said, now I want to talk to them about what their spiritual guidance is. And she said, each soul is part of a larger collective consciousness, which is really just one. But because humans have a hard time identifying separate self from a collective self, we're just going to describe it as separate units just to make everyone feel better. And she's kind of giggling. And she was just like, humans are so cute. Like, and she said, but so basically, each one of these people, their soul may have certain unique things they came here to do or to be or to accomplish. And she said, kind of like some of the people in the telepathy tapes, right? And she said, maybe that was part of their soul's evolution on Earth and part of how they're playing into the larger collective evolution. And which really at the end of the day is really just coming back to oneness and remembering what you are. And we're just here having experiences. And she said, but now these people, for example, they were here to be kind of, she said, starters in a new evolution of awareness and consciousness that helps us go from here's myself, and in order for someone to hear me, I need to make a sound or use my hands and speak in sign language or write things down or text them on my phone. And she's showing all these different things or draw a picture of something to demonstrate it to them. And she said, now they're reminding us of who we truly are. And they might have done this in a number of different ways, but in this lifetime, because they came into a time frame when there's greater technology available and podcasting happened to become a thing, they just so happen to be able to help to fulfill this part of their purpose in this way by being featured on this podcast as someone who is nonverbal and has telepathic ability. And she said, this is part of waking up the rest of the human consciousness. And she's showing like shaking people by the shoulders, like, wake up, wake up, wake up, wake up. And she's going like, it's a bed full of people. It's like beds and beds and beds and beds and beds and rows and rows and rows and like billions and billions and billions of souls. And she's like showing all the spiritual guides running through going, wake up, wake up, wake up. And she said, but really it's autistic people who can come and knock on the glass and be like, hey, you there? And she's showing like pressing the faces up to the glass. Like how little kids kind of like smush their nose. And she said, now see, it's really quite cute. And she said, and that might be part of why the individual soul came, is they're supposed to be part of that. She said, now not all of them come for that same unique expression of their soul's journey on earth, but they all know that they came here and they wanted to be here for this time period, no matter what might happen in the physical realm. And she said, some people's plans have more definition than others, and other people's plans are a little more loosey-goosey. And she's shaking her arms around. And she said, and they might have like a, I just want to experience this and it doesn't really matter how, where other people are like, hey, there's a real specific like event that I want to see. And she's showing someone in like an IMAX theater with the glasses and eating popcorn. Like there's something particular I came here to see or to do. And so she's saying, and it kind of depends And, like it's not always the same. But she said, now it's really important that you know this, because then you might not judge them so much, because they are a spiritual being too, having their own human experience. And when you really think about everyone like that, you're kind of like, oh, well, why don't we all just like help each other out a little bit? Because, we're all the same in the end. And so she said, there's a lot of people waking up to that knowledge on earth, a lot of people who think that way, and they can't even imagine anyone not thinking that way. And she said, but some people have really, really forgotten what they came here for. So these guys are kind of like awakeners. And she's saying, so for a lot of these people, they're here because they are here to experience this type of delight and surprise and joy of telepathic communication. And she's showing being able to bond with people and understand people on a deeper level, because you are using extrasensory perception and not being bound by words. And she said, now, there are a lot of humans who also can do this, and they can talk, right? Like mediums and psychics and stuff. And she said, but they're not nearly as telepathic or as extrasensory or psychic as nonverbal people are, because they don't have to have these extra senses on as high. And she said, and in fact, it's harder for them to turn these senses on and crank them up to the ability that these nonverbal people would have. Okay. And she said, it's not a judgment. Don't judge yourselves. Don't be like, well, but she said, it's okay. And she's just kind of warning, because there's always going to be someone out there that's like, well, what? And she's like, no, hold your horses, she said. And she said, doesn't mean you're not special in your own way. But remember, we all came here for unique purposes. So your purpose might be a little bit different, or your expression of your purpose might be different, because you came here in a different vehicle than this person did. Right, like you got different cars, but one is supposed to be the big car that's for showing off, and it's like big Buick. It's beautiful. It's a convertible. It's like it's here for like cruising. And then some of you guys came in race cars, and some of you guys came on motorcycles. Think about it like that. You got different things that you're doing here. Some of you all came on boats. You're not even going to be on the road. You're going to be out in the ocean, And so she said, think about your bodies and your vehicles that you came in kind of like that. And then she was showing me ADHD kids, and she said, now these kids are fascinating because they have so much available to them, and they have different ways that their ADHD can show up. And she said, and it's so interesting to think about, because cultural conditioning can have such a big impact, right? Like what we're learning, what we're seeing. And she said, and how it comes through each person, depending on, she's showing all these differences for people, like the region they grew up in and the race that they're in. And did they have any religious background in their family? Like, were they taught like there's a reason for everything? Or were they raised in a very scientific Western medicine household? Like, did they have parents who had access to therapy? Did they have parents who didn't believe in mental health services? And she's like, showing like someone like not having access to medicine or to therapy, and then someone who so they had to figure out everything on their own and come up with workarounds as they grew up and all this stuff. And maybe they didn't get treatment, or maybe it just wasn't like something like during that day and age, it wasn't really a thing yet, and she said like some people that really wasn't a thing. Like a lot of girls, like it wasn't a thing for girls to have ADHD when they were younger, or it was like very rare. But then they started realizing it just happens differently in girls. And just as many girls had ADHD for a long time. And she's looking at me with like her little cute face. She's like, long time, like a really long time. And I was like, boy, do I know it. And she said, so for ADHD people, there might be all these different circumstances that affect them. Right. And she said, and that's true for everyone, like really everyone. And she's showing the whole rainbow, and she's using her arms to show a whole big rainbow. She said, but ADHD people, so they kind of come to this earth to be challengers. And she said, a lot of them are here to be awakeners in a different way. They're not here to be controlled. They're not here to go with the status quo. And she said, so sometimes they can look a little bit like rebels, because like they might really, really, really want to be liked. And they might really, really, really want to do a good job, but they're not really here to like be liked for being quiet or small, or like to go with the status quo. They're here to be kind of more change makers. And she said, so if you're imagining a whole bunch of people walking through the woods trying to find their way, and there's no paved roads and there's no different way to go, the ADHD people would be the ones who'd be like, I'll go out ahead. I'm going to go find the best way. And they would go out ahead, and then they would come back and they'd plow the road on the way back for everyone else to go through. And she said, if you guys can think about yourselves like that, like you're a change maker, you're a way shower, you're here to find different ways and new ways and inventive ways and creative ways. She said, then you're going to really, really thrive. And she said, now you have to know how to work with your senses. So again, this is not like professional medical or mental health advice. Okay, guys. But she said, but you have to really know how to work with your senses well. And she said, some good therapy can be helpful. And she said, she's showing me like rejection sensitivity, and she said it can be really, really tough. But if you can find a really good environment that really supports you leaning into how you need to work best. And she said, and sometimes like a medication, like different people with autism or ADHD, maybe they need a certain type of, she's saying like a tummy thing, like a probiotic or a medication or something to help them. And she said, and then they can kind of she's showing all these big, beautiful ideas in their brains. She said, sometimes it just helps them get all these big, beautiful things in their brains like out in a nice linear fashion so that they can like make them come to life on paper, and she said, or they can, they're like, I have all these great ideas. Now I can actually like follow through on them and I'm not getting distracted and I'm not all over the place. And she said, and so it's not that the ideas they have are bad. It's not that the way they work is bad. It's just that they might need a little bit more work with how to work in linear time. And so she's showing their energy going so far up and out. And she said, now ADHD people and autistic people in general, they don't see time as very linear. And she's showing like for a more neurotypical brain, she said, so these people, neurotypicals, and she said, she's putting them in quotes because she's like, what's really neurotypical is kind of like the aside. And she's giggling again. And I still have Sam over here. He's just listening. He said, just biding my time. And he's kind of chuckling. But so she's showing me like a line that just appeared through the air. And she said, so this is neurotypical people see it like this. And it's like, here's point A, here's the beginning, here's the middle, here's the end, and here's all the events in between. Right? And she said, so when they're planning a project or an event or something, they're very much able to go, okay, this goes here and this goes here, and here's where this fits, and here's how this time works, etc. Here's all the steps. Here's what needs to happen. She said, like really good project planning. And she said, now people with ADHD, she said, when they're really trying to concept something, they're really good visionaries and they're good change makers, and they come up with higher concepts because that's what they're here to create and channel. They're here to come up with new ideas and concepts. They're here to know things before they're shown them. They're here to articulate things differently. They're here to kind of bring a little bit more magic and help it come to life on earth through their creative channels. But she said, but they're not the best planners. And she said, because you're, as an ADHDer, you're supposed to wait and notice when your body and your intuition says, oh, wait, this thing, not only can I see the thing I need to do, I can see all the steps clearly laid out to do it. And she said, now the key thing is for people with ADHD, you have really strong spidey senses. And you have strong intuitions. So you can't always work from just a rigid plan like a neurotypical could. She said a lot of neurotypicals tend to ignore their intuitions. So they might stay on a really rigid plan. And she's showing me the timeline. And she said, but maybe their intuition and spidey senses is saying, hey, you got to change that or it's not going to work out well. Hey, I know this looks right, but I don't know. You got to change routes. Like, I know this seems like this is the highway you're supposed to take, but you really should check Google Maps because there's going to be a big accident there. And she said, no, if they were listening to their intuitions and their spidey senses, it might tell them, you know what, I know that this is the way we planned or that we normally think to do this, but I think we should go a different way. Right? And she said, and a lot of times that helps them, that could help people a lot. She said, now ADHD people, when they're really in their flow and they're really letting themselves work how they need to, their intuition skyrockets. So they can't have too rigid of a plan. They do need to have a general timeline because they need to take all this beautiful 4, 5, 6D energy and dimensional availability that they can have and they can reach pretty easily, and they need to be able to bring it down. And she said, kind of like putting it in a little bit of like a packaging, in a little container down here on earth, but they also need to be able to sense if or when there are better ways to do things. So like they might have a bigger vision, but they're not always going to know all the steps to put it into place or to build it all out because they're not always meant to do all that. And she's saying, now, when they are meant to do certain things, their intuition will tell them. And she said, now the intuition for ADHD people they are spatial time seers, and she's showing for them, they don't always see things on like a timeline, like beginning, middle, and end, where it's just like backward, forward, she said it's more like they have this dome over their head. She's showing like a big dome over my head. And she said, so say like, let's say like, 1985, when you were born, that's over here to the left in the dome. And then like where you are now is back to the right corner. And she said, and then the end of your life is like up and over to the left. And she said, and now all these things in between. And she's showing like things being all like over the place spatially. And I said, oh my God, that is the best way I've ever seen that described in my life. And she said, yeah, it's kind of like that. It's like you have access to all of these different time frames, to all the different steps in a process, and to all of the things that you know you need to do, but it's not always in order. And she said, and that's because you guys are not meant to work only in linear time. You are here to work with higher senses because you're here to find better and higher ways of doing things. And that's why a lot of ADHD people, she goes, they become obsessed with doing things differently. And she said they can't help it. That's how they're wired, because they're here to be game changers. She's like, they're change makers, they're game changers, they're way showers. They're not here to just do it the same way, the status quo all the time. And she said a lot of them, especially young ones right now, are much more into their higher senses than ever. And it's important to help them understand how to articulate it and distill it down and help them get their big, beautiful ideas out on paper, or to talk to other people about them. She's showing like people sitting down and talking with kids. And she said, and really listen, because they're channeling some big things and they are here to give you higher guidance. So she's saying, now that's really important for ADHD kids to know, and adults, because you might have so many different projects and things you're interested in. And she said, because you're so much more multisensory, and you have so many more things you're interested in, and you need to look at what all of the common threads are between your interests. And she said, don't shame any of your interests. They're not wrong. They just have a whole bunch of different things like in common with them. And she said, also ADHD people have to know the difference between impulsivity, like when they just need that dopamine, versus when it's their intuition. And she said that will give them a lot of benefits in the end. And once they start to work with that, their impulsivity will go way down. And she's showing like her two hands like being at level, and then the impulsivity hand dropping down. And she said, and their intuition and clarity and insight and all that innovation energy they have is going to go way up. And she said, and that's how they learn to work with their energy. But it just takes a little bit of time to sort that out, or it takes a very willing teacher or a very willing parent to help them from when they're young. And she said, unfortunately, a lot of times the school system doesn't really help a lot with this, but there more and more schools have been getting on board with it. And she's kind of shaking her head about DEI programs. She's like, we'll see. And she just winked at me. But she said, but it's really good for kids like this to have very psychic or intuitive parents who are very, she said, very awake. She's showing her eyes being really awake, and really, really wide open. She said, because these parents can help them with their awareness, and they can help them make more conscious choices and deal with those big emotions that ADHD children get. The other thing that she wants to talk about, and she keeps bringing it up and showing me, but it's like, she said, well, I can give Allie so many downloads at once, but she can only communicate them in certain ways. And then it's like, I have her coming through stream of consciousness too. It's really interesting. It's hard to describe unless you channeled this way before. But she's saying also, like with ADHD kids, she goes, she's clearing her throat again. She said, with ADHD kids, they need so much more stimulation and movement. And she said, it's really important for them to get outside and go running. Like she said, like they're just like racers. Like they love to be outside. They love to move. And she said, and some autistic kids are really, really like this too. They need really good, the right type of stimulation and movement. And she's showing a kid on the swings, like the stimming. And she said, but for a lot of kids, they need hiking, and they need nature, and they need spaces where there's bird song or wind through the trees. She's showing like a little bit of breeze. And she said, and a lot of earthy elements. So like rocks, mountains, nature, a lot of trees. And she said the forests. And she said for these kids, these areas, she said, while they might stimulate them a little bit, they're going to be very calming and very soothing. And she said, and also it allows them to get out all of their little wigglies. Like they're just so wiggly. And so like they can't sit still. And so she's showing me how once they get out and they're in these environments and they're getting out for these good, she's saying like walks and bike rides and going out and playing and, playing games with their friends, even just being outside camping and doing things like that. She said, this is really important for these kids. And she said, also Mother Earth, it knows how to take care of people. She's like, it just does because we're part of her. And she goes, we kind of come from her if you think about it. And then we go back, like our vessels, we're kind of just borrowing them. And so she said, we're part of her ecosystem. And so she really knows how to take care of us. And nature always finds a way to work with each person's unique energy system and their unique body and vessel exactly how they need to. So when you're out in nature can help rebalance things and move energy through you. And she said for ADHD kids, because they can be kind of like, overstimulated and they can get a little bit like hyper and she's showing like ADD and ADHD. She's like distracted, like they're all over the place. Nature and natural elements can help them really clear their senses out. And she said, it's kind of like clearing out a junk drawer. And she said, every time you go out in nature, especially for these types of kids, they get some movement and they get the fresh air and the green grass and the trees and all the nice smells. She was like, then they start to go, okay. And she goes, and then they'll sit down and quietly read a book for a whole hour, And she's like, they're not so hyper anymore. Or they're not so, trying to like, she goes, getting into this, getting into that, asking questions about this, going on. She's like, pacing. And she said a lot of these kids, they'll pace if they can't get their energy out. So instead, she's like, get them outside. And she said, but really the spiritual purpose for ADHD kids is they're here to be adventurers. They're here to be explorers. Like they're here to explore not just around the earth. They're here to explore, bringing other new ideas, in finding better ways to do things on this earth. They're here to be artists and inventors and creators. And she said, and teachers and entertainers. And she said, and they're also here to do really cool scientific inventions. And they're here to also like show us what it is to live a little less encumbered, like to let go of some of that rigid structure that makes everyone so unhappy. And she was like, to be a little more fearless. She said ADHD kids have a little bit more of that if you don't squash it out of them when they first come in. She said that's part of their spiritual purpose. And she said there's so much more to this, and we know that you guys kind of struggle with these things, so we want to remind you how important you are. And she said, and you guys really are our buddies, and we come in, we watch out for you, and we come in to help you. And she's saying, and you can call on us anytime if you need guidance or to come and shield or clear your energy. And she's just sitting, and she put her hands in her lap and she's swinging her legs in my little chair, and she goes, and and then the other guy just went, and scene. So I think she's done. We done? She goes, well, yeah. And she just rolled her eyes and started giggling. Okay, guys, I hope that was helpful. I thought that was really interesting, the way that came through. I did not expect that at all. I always joke that like I'll come in with kind of an idea of what I'm going to channel or something that's popping in my head over and over. And when I bring them through, I'm always like, oh, okay, guess we're going this direction. So, I just clear channel it and let it come through the way it needs to. Anyways, I hope that you guys really enjoyed this episode. And as per usual, if you have any questions about anything, feel free to reach out via the link in my bio or in the show notes. In addition, I will have everything linked up in the show notes, but I do have the Art of Channeling, which is coming up in April, just a reminder, as well as the Spirit Guides, how to channel Spirit Guides or how to connect with Spirit Guides Masterclass in early March. I will also have replays available on that one if you can't make it on the actual day of. We have our Patreon group, which has a bunch of fun stuff going on in there. And I also am taking submissions for stories for the listener episodes for the podcast, or people who want to be interviewed on the podcast, or have suggestions about topics that you would like to see covered on the podcast, as well as for a Spirit Speak series where I bring through amazing women from history, from the other side, to come and talk and channel and share their stories and perspectives and afterlife wisdom. If there's anyone that you would like to see channeled and you're like, ooh, can you talk to Cleopatra? Ooh, can you talk to Isis? Oh, can you talk to Anne Frank or whoever else? I can always reach out and see if those beings will come through. I can't promise anyone will come through, but If you do have anyone that you really, 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 really want to hear from, or any topics you're really interested in, feel free to email me about those things. I'm spiritspeaker2022@gmail.com, or you can use the link in the bio to do that, or join the Pod Squad group on Patreon, because they get first dibs on topics and voting on future episodes and all of that fun stuff. Alrighty. Thank you so much, guys. Go and have a fantastic night. And thank you so much for listening to this episode of Getting Ghosted.